I recently received a comment on one of my videos that I thought would be appropriate to make a video response to. I'm going to read the comment, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the time in the video just saying what I think about this comment, and talking about some of the points that the skeptic in the comment decided to bring up. So I intend for this is probably a very long video by the time you get it. I intend for this video to be long because I just don't think that this is a topic that's appropriate to just try to cover in 5 minutes. And also, strangely enough, those 5-minute videos that I make, or try to make in 5 minutes, the shorter the video is, the longer it generally takes for me to make. If I'm able to just speak my thoughts freely, it takes longer, but honestly I think it'll be worth it. So, the comment was on the God of Wonders video that I uploaded, which is a really good documentary that's spreading around the world. I get something like a couple thousand views in Japan every month with the Japanese version. But it's a really good documentary. It's about creation. It showcases a lot of scientists who are pro-creation, but it's not a creation versus evolution video. It's just a documentary about look at the beauty of God's creation. And so it's really meant to minister to people. It's not really, this particular case, it's just not a video that's intended to fight evolution, because it just wasn't the purpose of this video. It was just showcasing the beauty of creation. Anyway, I think you get the idea. So the comment was, I noticed they didn't show Ebola, AIDS, starvation, and all the people killing each other to try to prove which God is greater. Did God not create smallpox? And by the way, the commenter puts little g God there. Did God not inspire the Crusades? Did Allah not inspire the war in the Middle East? Did Allah not inspire the war in the Middle East? Okay. What is it? Okay, there's a comment here. What is it they say when they slaughter women in Iran? Allah Akbar? Is that not what I hear? Why weren't these things showcased as the glory of God? Doesn't the glory of the Most High include starvation in Africa? How about we show the pictures of buzzards feeding on the remains of humans that were left on the plains of Africa to starve to death? How about the truth? How about the fact that there is no conscious God, there is no intelligent creation, all creation including diseases and natural disasters are the products of the laws of science? Are we as a people too afraid to know the truth? Religious leaders want to lull you into a false sense of security so they can abuse their power. They appoint themselves as products of God with God's super strengths and use them to rape, pillage, abuse, and overpower other people. Knowing the truth is freeing yourself from the oppression that is religion. Okay, so a lot said here. Take a moment, read this for yourself, just think about it. I corrected a couple of the typos as I read this. You know, everybody makes typos. Who cares? I think that we're not trolling people's typos. This is the stupidest thing that people ever do on social media. Famous last words. Anyway. There's obviously a lot of major fallacies here. Christianity and Islam are two different religions. The God of the Quran is a false God. In the Quran, Allah teaches people to go around killing all of the unbelievers. Says in Surah 9 something to the effect of, when the holy months are over, go and kill the unbelievers wherever you can find them. You know, hide in ambush for them and seize them, and basically tells the Muslim to force people to convert. If they're not willing to convert or become a second-class citizen in the Islamic community, then they should die. But anyway, this video's main focus is not on Islam. But comparing the Islam is a false religion. I think it's really short-sighted it's really short-sighted and really illogical for atheists, and I'm assuming that the guy who's responding to me is an atheist, when they try to take all the religions of the world and lump them together and say, oh, you're following religion, it's like as if there's this one massive belief system out there called religion. You know, it's as if they whitewash the differences, not only between Catholicism and somebody who goes to a Calvary Chapel church. You know, it's like, okay, there's this major differences under the umbrella term that people would generally call Christianity, let alone the incredible differences between Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism. These are major, major differences. Ravi Zacharias has a quote from somebody that was extremely clever. I don't remember it exactly, but I guess I'm going to ruin it with paraphrasing it. Talk about all religions are generally the same, except when it comes to origin, destiny, sin, salvation, God. So he goes through these, he says, oh yeah, all religions are the same, and it's like, except where it really matters. Yeah, generally religions teach that, oh, you should be moral in some general term. However, the different religions will very much differ on what their views of morality are. So all religions are not equal. They're not the same. And yes, a lot of violence has been done in the name of religion. However, it's really foolish to show this famous picture the atheists put out there, photograph of the Twin Towers, and there's a beautiful sunrise coming up behind them, and it says, "Imagine no religion." You know what? That's really stupid, because you are lumping, any classification that lumps Amish people who really will turn the other cheek if you smack them in the face with Muslims who want to go fly a plane into a building. And you know what? Yes, there's peaceful Muslims out there, but when you're lumping together religious extremists who will really turn the other cheek if you slap them with religious extremists who want to go fly a plane into a building, you've got a problem. You know, of course, you know, I just did it right there. Religious extremists. An Amish versus a jihadist. The person here mentioned the Crusades. And you know what? Yes, there was, without a doubt, there was a lot of horrible things that happened during the Crusades. But however, this fails to acknowledge that the Crusades were primarily defensive. Muslim invaders conquered 2/3 of the Christian world before the Crusades happened. So they were going around for centuries, conquering Christian lands, raping and pillaging. And it's amazing that, to me, it just blows my mind. People are always talking about oh, the evil of the Crusades, but they totally ignore the centuries of Islamic violence, which was much more intense, that went on for hundreds and hundreds of years before the Christians in Europe, and I'm using the term Christian here quite loosely, finally said, enough is enough, we are going to defend ourselves. 2/3 of the Christian world conquered in the name of Muhammad's religion. Now, yeah, does he have a good point here? Yes, there's been a lot of evil done in the name of religion. However, the atheist logic of this is totally illogical. I mean, how does this logic go? A lot of evil has been done in the name of religion. Therefore, religion is false. It's imaginary. Well, you know what? A lot more violence has been done in the name of atheism/Darwinism than done in the name of religion. More people have been killed. You take all of the wars of recorded history put together, you know, both religious and non-religious. Take all the number of people who have been killed. Add them up. Now, go and add up the numbers of people who have been killed in the name of Darwin-inspired ideologies. It includes Nazism, communism. Take all those people that have been killed, especially those killed in the name by their own governments. Add those up. It's actually more than the number of people who have been killed in the wars of the history of the world, religious or otherwise. And of course, that's not including the number of people who have been killed through abortion in the United States. And believe it or not, abortion was very much influenced by evolutionary thought. Legalizing of abortion was influenced by Haeckel's embryos, which I've talked about in other videos. False embryo drawings from the 1860s that were still in the public school textbooks until very recently. But anyway, I want to look at his first sentence again. I noticed they didn't show Ebola, AIDS, starvation, all the people killing each other, try to prove which God is greater. So primarily what they have here is, if there's a good God out there, and he's assuming that God is good, then why is there so much evil in the world? Why is it that the world is filled with death and suffering? Well, interestingly, I think that Christianity, or biblical, and actually, I'm not even going to say Christianity, I'm going to say the Bible, I think the Bible is the only thing in the world with a coherent response to the problem of evil. Why is there death and suffering in this world? And what the Bible teaches us is it teaches us that originally there was no death and suffering. In the Garden of Eden, everything was very good. When the world was first created, there was no death and no suffering. And by the way, when I say no death, I mean there was no death of humans, there was no death of animals. In Hebrew, there's two different words for death, and two different phrases that we would translate as life. Whereas we think of life in the biological sense, and being a biotech major who studied definitely my fair share of biology, when I think of life, I tend to think of it in the biological sense. But in Hebrew, it's talking about it in the spiritual sense. So in Hebrew, plants aren't considered to be alive in the sense that a human or a dog is alive. A plant doesn't have a spirit, whereas a human or an animal does. And of course, what would be considered an animal and what wouldn't be, like sponges, under that system would be questionable. Whereas in biology we have, modern biology, we have our system of classification based on the physical makeup of one organism. But this life, in a spiritual sense versus only being alive in the biological sense, it's looking at the spiritual structure, not just the physical. Anyway, that's kind of a tangent. When God first created everything, no death and suffering. Disease didn't exist. This person asked, what about Ebola? What about AIDS? AIDS is called, I actually do think that the HIV virus was created by God, but not in the way that you might think. In its normal host, there's two types of HIV. There's HIV-1 and HIV-2. And in their respective wild hosts, they don't harm the organism. Unfortunately, HIV jumped to humans, which was an inappropriate host to have, or what we would call the ancestor of HIV, or ancestors, since it's two types. And because it's in an inappropriate host, it causes us to be sick. Salmonella, I think, would be a good analogy too. Salmonella lives on birds and reptiles. It's a bacterium that's somewhat similar to E. coli, but it's different. Salmonella lives on birds and reptiles, and it's normal for them. For them, it's what's called normal flora. So it's just part of how their biology is made that they have salmonella on the outside, and it doesn't get them sick. Probably does some good jobs for them, helps them to live. So anyway, salmonella. Salmonella is normal flora for birds and reptiles. It does good jobs for them. It's meant to be on their skin. E. coli. A lot of people, whenever I say I work with E. coli in the laboratory, they get scared. They're like, oh, E. coli, isn't that horribly dangerous? And actually the strain that we work with is harmless. E. coli is normally harmless. You have millions and billions and trillions of E. coli in your body right now. They live in your large intestine, and without them you would probably die. So some people might pose the question, well, why did God create E. coli? Well, without E. coli, you'd be dead, without the job that it does. But unfortunately, we live in a fallen world where mutations happen and living things get corrupted. And so it's not that when we look at viruses and we look at parasitic bacteria and we look at parasites in general, it's not that God said, oh, I'm going to go create a leech to suck your blood, or I'm going to go make a mosquito to suck your blood, or I'm going to go make a virus or some bacterium that's going to harm you. No, it's that the world was designed to be very good. But we live in a world that's broken. It's not working right. Things break down, and that causes disease. It's like cancer. It's like saying, why did God create cancer? Well, he didn't. You have a number of genetic factors in your body that are designed specifically to suppress tumors. They're designed to fight tumors and designed to prevent tumors from growing. Now, unfortunately, every once in a while, you end up having it where you have a long list of genetic factors that are all broken. All these defenses that God designed inside of your cell to prevent tumors from growing are broken, they're destroyed. And then, even though with all of those things broken, the cell ends up having other things that are broken as well. You know, the ability to divide at the appropriate time, that breaks down. And then the cell thinks it's supposed to divide all the time. And normally, if a cell was dividing all the time, you have genetic factors that would say, okay, something's going wrong here, our machinery isn't working right, let's commit cell suicide. So the cell will intentionally commit suicide, but you have all these machines that are broken, all these different genetic factors aren't working right. And so a lot of things have to go wrong, a whole lot of things have to go wrong in order for cancer to even be possible. And unfortunately, we've experienced thousands of years of the curse. Our DNA has been breaking down for thousands and thousands of years. It's not getting better and better, as Darwinism says, and human geneticists are seeing this. I've talked about that more in my other videos, and I don't want to get into genetic entropy right now, but even if you reject even if you think that even if you reject the term genetic entropy, human geneticists agree that the human genome is breaking down. It's not getting better and better and better. Obviously, this implies that Darwinism is wrong, but it's still, the implications, of course, are kind of swept under the carpet. Because, you know, that just can't be. Now, obviously, death and suffering are mentioned here. The commenter put a couple things on this video, talked about different examples. You know, things like starvation. You know, we actually have enough food in the world to feed everybody. You know, but it's because of corruption in government. It's because of the little g God that we've made ourselves. That is why there's so much evil in this world. If it weren't for the actions of human beings, there would be no death and suffering. It's because of sin that we've created suffering, and it's both spiritual and physical. You look at Hurricane Katrina. I find it interesting that, you know, I see all of these natural disasters. We see starvation, we see the spread of HIV in its corrupted form. So you have HIV spreading around the world in its corrupted form. You know, I submit to you that if we were to follow God's word, if we weren't sleeping with people, if men in Africa weren't having sex with baby girls to try to cure themselves of HIV, if people would stop giving their bodies away to every person who comes, to all these people, if sex were for marriage, if people were saving their bodies or marriage. In marriage are one man and one woman. I submit to you the spread of HIV I submit that the spread of HIV would be virtually halted tomorrow. People weren't respecting their bodies, they weren't doing drugs and having sex with strangers. And you have proper screening techniques, obviously, for blood donations and things like that, which they do in the United States, thankfully. I mean, HIV wouldn't be able to spread. If people around the world had clean water, and we do have enough money so that everybody in the world can have clean water, then so much hunger and disease would stop. Now, I don't mean to be judging here, because this is not, I've not been giving enough money to charity. But this person who asked, why is there starvation and disease in the world? I would like to ask, how much money in the past year have you given for people in the third world to have clean water? Now granted, you might have given a lot, and that's great. My understanding is that studies have shown that in the United States, Christians are the ones that really tend to give a lot more. So I mean, before you start talking about, well, the evil of religion, well, look at the good that Christianity has done in the world. Christians go around the world teaching people to read and write, and giving people fresh food and clean water. We go to places like Africa. We go to places like India. We go all over the world trying to help people to have better lives. And we don't just focus on spiritual, we focus on the physical needs of people as well. The church that I grew up going to has programs where they help give water to people, help provide water for people in Uganda. And they have these giant buckets that collect rainwater. They put on the roof of the church buildings, because that's a practical place to put them, in Uganda. And apparently, I think it's Uganda, pardon me if I'm wrong, but apparently in this particular country they get a lot of rain, and so it's enough to get enough clean drinking water. And these buckets collect the water, and there's like a filtering system, and there's things to keep the water clean. I recently learned that Americans spend in excess of $400 billion every year on Christmas. It would take $20 billion for everyone in the world to have clean water. 5% of what we spend every year on Christmas is what it would take to solve the world's water problem. Of course, I mentioned Hurricane Katrina earlier. And people, if there was proper planning, if proper engineering was done, make where the levees didn't break, even the natural disasters, the problems caused by those, I mean, it could be done if anyway, like I was saying, pretty much I think almost all of the suffering in the world. Some of it's just out of our hands, but look at the evil in the world. Almost all of it, I think, could be solved if human beings. God gave us the means. We have enough food to feed everybody. We have enough money to provide everybody with clean water. Basic vaccinations could probably be widespread in the world. I mean, we've eradicated smallpox, and recently they found a small issue with a few people with smallpox, or so I've heard. But essentially, we've eradicated smallpox. If you're an American in the United States, when was the last time you heard of somebody getting polio? When was the last time you heard of somebody getting malaria in the United States? Maybe I live too far north, but I've never heard of somebody in the United States, at least in recent times, getting malaria. Well, that's part of what I have to say on that. And of course, the existence of evil definitely brings up a lot of questions on its own. If you're saying that killing women in the name of Islam is evil, then you have to have some standard of absolute to say that something is absolutely evil. There's a famous atheist named Richard Dawkins. He said before that at the bottom of the universe there is no good or evil. We're all just dancing to our DNA. He then wrote a book on the evils done in the name of religion. Obviously, of course, this brings up the question. It's like, wait a minute, Richard Dawkins, if you're saying that there's no good or evil, ultimately, that we're all just dancing to our DNA, ultimately implying that there's no such thing as free will. There's no such thing as good and evil. We're all just dancing to our DNA. That how can you say that the actions done in the name of religious people were evil? You have no basis to say that anything is good or evil at all. Now, that doesn't take away from the horror and the shock that people have, because obviously we see that there's evil. But in an atheistic universe, if atheism is true, then what is the basis you possibly have for logically saying that anything is good or evil? You have none, except for personal preference. But you know what? In some countries, they love their neighbors. In other countries, they eat their neighbors. Do you have a preference? It's not all just, well, some people have their morality and other people have other morality. It's not just about personal preference. And that's, of course, the problem with moral relativism. There is absolute good and evil in the world. Ravi Zacharias, a famous Christian philosopher who goes around the world speaking, recounts a story of how he was on a plane with a woman, and they were talking, and they each were talking to each other, and they found out what the other one does. And come to find out, she was a woman working in the red light district. Yeah, so she recounted a story of a place called Snake's Blood Alley. Maybe I said it wrong. But what happens is people go there and to this alley. They get a mix of snake's blood and hard liquor. And they're given whatever they want. She rescued a baby girl. She was 6 months old or 8 months old. Baby girl. From the arms of a man who was plundering her, who was intoxicated to the snake's blood drink. Ravi Zacharias, after recounting the story, says, "Mr. Dawkins, is this not evil?" And you know what? He's told that story to a few people, to audiences before. And apparently one person he told to, who is I guess I'm taking he was an atheist. So, who would say at the bottom of the universe there is no good or evil. He recounted the story, and the person said, "You know what? I don't like it, but I can't call it evil. You know what? You gotta hand it to the guy for being honest within his worldview." So that's part of what I had to say. The objection that atheists have about death and suffering in the world. Well, how can there be a good God if there's so much evil in the world? It really becomes a self-defeating statement. Like the famous quote, "There is no absolute truth." Well, it's not an absolute statement. Obviously this one's a little more complex, but if you're going to say that there's absolute good or evil in the world, if you're going to say it's absolutely evil to be killing a woman for being raped, these adulteresses in Iran and in different Muslim countries around the world who are raped, and then they're convicted of adultery. You say what you want about religion. There's nothing like that in the Bible. When adultery happened in Old Testament Israel, both the man and the woman were to be stoned to death. And obviously we know what Jesus said. Well, maybe we don't. There's nothing like that in Christianity. There's nothing like that in biblical Christianity. A woman who gets raped is not somebody who's supposed to be just stoned to death for being raped. I know I'm going to get a lot of people taking Bible verses out of context, but you know what? With the Bible in its full, it doesn't teach the victims of rape are to be killed for adultery. And you know what? In order to be able to say that this is absolutely evil, in order to be able to say that the rape of a baby is absolutely evil, you have to say that there's an absolute good and an absolute evil in the universe. But in a materialistic universe, you have no basis for saying that. If we're all just dancing to our DNA, and there's no good or evil at the bottom of the universe, and there's no basis to say that anything's good or evil. You can say I prefer it or don't prefer it, but at the end of the day, it becomes no different than chocolate versus vanilla ice cream. It's only personal preference. But I would submit to you that there is an absolute moral law in the universe. An absolute moral law implies an absolute moral lawgiver, because an absolute moral law doesn't just pop into existence out of nowhere. Why is it wrong to go around raping and pillaging villages of people? Because human beings are created in the image of God. If you think that human beings are just another organism, no different than the bacteria in my petri dish that I work with, then you can't say the Crusades were evil. It was just an example of natural selection. You can't say that jihad was evil. It's just an example of natural selection. You have one group of organisms on one hand, you have a different group of organisms on another, and they're all competing for resources. They're all competing for the land. It's no different than, it's no more good or evil than when one group of bacteria outcompetes another. It's all the same. Human beings aren't created in the image of God, they're just another organism. And you know what? For those of you who call yourselves Christians, or trying to embrace evolution or embrace millions of years, because you're told, well, that's science, that's not science. We have overwhelming evidence for creation. I used to be an evolutionist, until I looked into the arguments of scientists arguing for creation, and the arguments of scientists arguing for intelligent design. And on top of that, by the way, those of you who are arguing for an old earth, and saying, well, there was millions of years of death, disease, and suffering before God created Adam, you're trying to embrace progressive creationism, which rejects the global flood, which the Bible clearly teaches, which teaches there was death before sin, which the Bible clearly rejects. You're trying to say, well, God looked at millions of years of death, disease, suffering, cancer, and said it was all very good. I don't know what God you're serving, but that is not the God. Perhaps you are serving the God of the Bible, but that description you're giving is not the God of the Bible. In the Bible, God says he hates death, he hates disease, he hates suffering. Jesus didn't come to the earth healing the deaf and the blind because God looked, and healing people with disease and sickness because God looked at leprosy millions of years ago and said, behold, it is very good. So anyway, I had a lot to say in this video. Thank you for taking the time to watch it. And I think one more thing to say before closing is, actually, in the video that the person commented on, God of Wonders, they actually did cover part of this. They did talk about, yeah, there's a lot of ugliness in this world too. There's a lot of beauty, there's also a lot of ugliness. And you know what? That's because of the fall. And it's because of death and suffering. Charles Darwin ultimately rejected the Christian belief in God. most people don't know that he was actually a student of theology. And I think the only degree, if I could be mistaken on this, but the only degree he ever got was a theology degree. And he was taught an old earth view of creation, an unbiblical view that was taught to him in his classes. And it was said, oh, this is what science has shown. And he recognized that all those millions of years of death and suffering does not fit with the God of the Bible. Even Charles Darwin recognized that those ideas don't fit with the Bible. He ended up marrying his first cousin, and he had children by her. One of these children, his daughter, Emma, I believe her name was Emma. Names are sometimes hard for me, but I really want to say it was Emma. I'm almost sure of it, but you know, people misspeak in videos. His daughter Emma was very sick, and she eventually died. And when she died, that destroyed whatever last bit of hope he had in the goodness or the belief that the God of the Bible is real. But let's take a look at this real quick. He was going against God's law when he married a close relative. The Bible says not to marry close relatives. And you know what? Yes, that's in the Old Testament, but the New Testament affirms that the sexual laws of the Old Testament are to be maintained. The morality of the Old Testament is still valid. It says don't marry close relatives. And he might not have understood the genetic basis of why, but even he knew that children of incestuous relationships tended not to do as well. It wasn't God's fault that his daughter died. It was Darwin's. And the same goes for a lot of our evil and our sin. We will sit here and we will blame God for our sin. Blame God for the consequences of our sin or somebody else's sin. Sometime that baby in Africa who contracts HIV, she didn't sin. Or at least it wasn't her sin that caused her to get the HIV. It was the sin of the man who raped her. So take a look at that. Our sin does impact other people. And you know what? God doesn't always protect us from those consequences. Sometimes he does, but not always. You know, a baby who was born with some genetic disorder. Part of that can go back to the sin of our first parents. And by the way, when the Bible talks about the first sin, some people have said, "Oh, well, that's sexist." You know, well, you're blaming a woman for the first sin and for the destruction of humanity. No, the Bible actually blames the man. It blames Adam. You know, but people don't know that if they don't read the Bible. Alright. Anyway. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Check out my websites. They'll be up in a minute. This is Greg, out.